The small town of Raven's Hollow was nestled deep within a dense forest, surrounded by towering trees and thick underbrush. The people there lived simple lives, untouched by the chaos of the modern world. But the town harbored a secret, one that had been whispered about for generations. There was something in the woods, something dark and ancient. Every year, as autumn approaches and the nights grew longer, the town held a festival to ward off the evil spirits they believed roamed the forest. It was a time of bonfires, dancing, and laughter, but it was also a time of fear. No one ventured into the woods after dark, not since the disappearances had started many years ago. Evelyn Harper had grown up in Raven's Hollow, and like everyone else, she knew the stories. She had heard them from her grandmother, a stern woman who would sit by the fire and recount the tales of those who had vanished without a trace. But Evelyn was not one to believe in old legends. She was a rational woman, grounded in the realities of life, and she dismissed the tales as nothing more than superstitions. One evening, just before the festival, Evelyn decided to take a walk in the woods. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched underfoot as she wandered deeper into the forest. The sun was setting, casting long shadows between the trees, but Evelyn wasn't afraid. She knew the woods well, having spent her childhood exploring every inch of them. As she walked, she noticed how quiet it had become. The birds had stopped singing, and the wind no longer rustled the leaves. An uneasy feeling settled over her, but she shook it off and pressed on. After all, there was nothing to fear in the woods, nothing but the old stories. Suddenly, she heard a rustling in the bushes behind her. She stopped, turning to look, but saw nothing. The forest was still and silent. Evelyn took a deep breath and continued walking, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, and she quickened her pace. As she neared the edge of the woods, she heard it again, footsteps, slow and deliberate, following her. Panic gripped her heart as she broke into a run, the trees blurring past her as she raced toward the safety of the town. But no matter how fast she ran, the footsteps were always right behind her, growing closer and closer. She burst out of the woods, breathless and trembling, but the footsteps stopped as soon as she crossed the tree line. Evelyn glanced back, but there was nothing there, only the darkening forest, silent and still. Shaken, she hurried home, locking the door behind her. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind outside made her jump. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, that there was nothing out there. But deep down, she knew something had followed her. The next day, Evelyn told her friend, Sarah, about the experience. Sarah was skeptical, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You shouldn't have gone into the woods, Evelyn," she said quietly. "Not this time of year." Evelyn scoffed. "You don't believe in those old stories, do you?" Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but it's better to be safe." The festival arrived, and the town was filled with the sounds of music and laughter. Evelyn tried to put the incident out of her mind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The sensation was stronger at night, when she was alone in her house. She began to see shadows moving in the corners of her vision, fleeting glimpses of something dark and twisted. One night, unable to sleep, Evelyn decided to take a walk through the town. The streets were deserted, the only light coming from the occasional street lamp. As she walked, she felt the familiar sensation of being watched, but this time it was different, more intense, more sinister. She turned a corner and froze. At the end of the street, standing in the shadows, was a figure that was tall and thin, its body unnaturally elongated, with arms that hung too low and fingers that curled like claws. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she backed away slowly, but the figure began to move toward her, gliding silently across the ground. Panic surged through her as she turned and ran, her footsteps echoing through the empty streets. She didn't dare look back, knowing that if she did, the figure would be right behind her. She reached her house and slammed the door shut, her hands trembling as she locked it. Evelyn retreated to her bedroom, locking the door and huddling under the covers. But she knew it wouldn't protect her. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, and she could hear whispers, soft, malevolent voices that filled the room. The door creaked open slowly, and Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She saw the shadow move across the floor, long and twisted, as the figure entered the room. As the creature came into the room, it ran to Evelyn and whispered something. Since that day Evelyn became insane. Now she is in a mental hospital, drawing that creature every day.